saw it before the pandemic. So when people first asked me about doing something about identifying trees, I said, you want to identify trees because that's part of what you use to identify mushrooms is what trees are, but you're really interested in the natural community. So we're going to go through a little bit about trees first, and then we're going to go into natural communities. And I'll tell you why that's important once we get here. Many people have what's called tree blindness. That was in a New York Times article in 2017. And then there's also an issue with modern people have lost the ability to notice and understand the importance of trees. So it's a really common thing, so don't feel bad if you don't know how to identify trees. I'm going to give you the resources you need. It's curable. One of my favorite trees up at Highlands Park up in Virginia is growing over this big rock. See, the roots are all down there. So trees do really great, interesting things. The American Forestry Association has a definition of what a tree is. Something that's 3 inches in diameter, 4.5 feet above the ground, which is called diameter at breast high, and has a definite crown of foliage. So like bamboo is not a tree because it doesn't have a crown of foliage. Lots of other things that are tall and thin aren't trees because they don't have a crown of foliage. And a height of 13 feet, so that's what a tree is. The benefits of knowing about trees, it's not just something that you're going to use to win a bar bet or have a parlor trick, but it's a way of paying attention to the world around us. And it's a way of understanding local history, because if you know about trees, you know something about the landscape, you know about logging that's happened, you know about agriculture that's happened, and it's a gateway to understanding ecology. So tree identification is really a great thing. This is one of my watercolor, I threw in watercolor paintings, because I know this is after dinner, everybody's going to be nodding, so occasionally we have little bright things. This is sycamore. So there's 60,000 trees worldwide, 1,000 trees in the US, 221 native to North Carolina, 73 introduced to North Carolina. We probably have somewhere around 70 native trees here in Forsyth County and surrounding Triad, and that doesn't count the cultivated landscape trees. So North Carolina trees were 25 families, and that includes things like pine, beech, maple, rose family. So apple trees are in the rose family, walnuts, willows, several others. 46 genera. So the pine family is composed of the pinus, the spruce, the hemlock, the fir. Beech family has beech, chestnuts, and oak. You think why those don't necessarily seem like they belong together, but all of them have their nuts in little casings that have burrs on them. So the chestnut, the oak cap, the chestnut, and the beech trees. So they're all similar because of that. And the magnolia family includes our native deciduous magnolias, the evergreen one from the coastal plain, which is planted here as a landscape tree, and also the tulip tree. People miscall that the tulip poplar, but it's not a poplar, it's actually in the magnolia family. It's one of my little pet peeves there. And the pea family, which includes the things that have members of the pea family do nitrogen fixation, so locust, redbud, yellowwood. So the most common tree that you're going to find is the red maple. It's blooming right now, so my bees are bringing in maple pollen to the beehive. Big tree, best in moist soils, excellent fall color. It is one of the fire intolerant plants like beech that have smooth bark. And those trees would normally not be all over the landscape if natural fires still went through. They would be eliminated because they're fire intolerant. But we find red maples, we find beech trees all over the landscape now because they don't get damaged by fire. There's a lot of other native trees, oaks, red and white, sycamore, hickories, American beech, pines, magnolias, walnuts, beech, and a lot of smaller trees that are understory trees, sourwood, famous of sourwood honey, our state flowering tree, which is the dogwood, American holly, serviceberry, pawpaw, some other ones. So there's lots of those. I'm going to just show you an example of redbud. Is common cultivated. It's a native. It blooms early, lives only about 20 years. It's a common tree. The funny thing about cultivated things is a lot of them have cultivars. So you can get gold leafed ones, you can get red leafed ones. People in the horticultural trade love red leaf plants because red leaf plants aren't as susceptible to insect damage. So that's one of the reasons why red leaf plants are very common. People like them because the anthocyanins in the red are toxic to insects. But that also means all bets are off when you're trying to identify a tree in an urban area, because it could be all kinds of things from anywhere in the world. So that does, most of our non-native stuff occurs in the urban areas. So the identification of trees, the best way to learn trees is to take a walk in the woods with somebody that you know, because some trees I can take you places, and just by the smell of some trees, you'll be able to identify that tree for the rest of your life. So there are just some things that you need that are hard to find in a book or anything else. There's study guides and keys. So yes?
I'm sorry, could you tell me or name a couple of trees that are real distinctive around smell?
Sassafras is a real good one. Sweet birch is a real good one. Those are probably the two that come to mind most readily. There are a few other ones. Horse sugar is another one that is a smaller shrubby thing. So, you know, those, once you have those in your brain, you won't forget them. So study keys and guides and web resources. We're going to talk about web resources. The Flora of the Southeastern and Atlantic States, which is put together by Alan Weekly. This comes from the North Carolina Herbarium at UNC Chapel Hill. Alan's been working on this forever. It is now available as an app, which I'll show you some details about, but this is what you want. This is the resource for identifying trees and getting the names right and getting the range maps right and everything. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about FloraQuest app. And you all are gonna wanna buy the FloraQuest app and put it on your phone. So, the other thing about knowing about trees is you gotta know where you are in the landscape. Certain trees are only gonna be certain places in the landscape. So, learning to identify trees, the first step is to learn the morphological, that's the plant shape. So what are the plant shape, what's the leaf shape, what's the leaf arrangement, those sorts of things you need to know. Learn the seasonal changes of flowering and fruiting and winter buds, and learn the habitat types. What's in the dry upland, what's on a moist hillside, what's on the north side of the hill, what's on the south side of the hill, what grows on the floodplain. So we'll talk about all of that coming up. So the methods, most people learn stuff from their friends and family. I don't know you, but if you ever met my family, they don't know shit about trees. So you really don't want to ask any of my family about trees. And it's probably true with a lot of your family. So friends and family are iffy. My wife's mother had a name, something related to biblical, for every tree that she had, even though most of the trees here in North America aren't in the Holy Land. I don't know why that happened, but she had that. So there are experts. There are also groups that you can go into outings. I'm also the president of the Native Plant Society. We take native plant people out on trips. We all went out over trees. Same thing with the Piedmont Land Conservancy. Gardens and nature preserves. One of the best arboreta, or probably the best arboretum in North Carolina that nobody knows about, is Green Hill Cemetery in Greensboro. Green Hill Cemetery, a guy named Bill Kraft started about 1950, just going into Green Hill Cemetery and planting things without telling anybody. Back in the day when you could just plant things and you didn't ask the park or the cemetery people. So there's Chinese blue oaks, there's weeping Mexican pines, there's tea trees, you know, the tea of coffee tea, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. They're all labeled with nice stainless steel label. You can go to Greensboro Parks and Rec, go to Green Hill Cemetery and download a spreadsheet of 700 species that are identified there in that. So it's really a great resource. Yes?
Where's the location of it?
The Green Hill Cemetery is just on the edge of downtown Greensboro, 1 block north from where the ball field is. So I think it's off of Battleground and
that's
that's
where
the
it
one.
splits.
That's the one I'm thinking of. I can't remember the name. Yeah, Battleground and Fisher, and then there's a side street right there, and the entrance to the cemetery, but you can find it online, but they're all labeled, it's really great. So that's a great place to go, because they have, like, the cucumber magnolia, the umbrella magnolia, the deciduous magnolia, the big leaf magnolia, all planted in one area where you can compare them all together, that kind of stuff. So they've done a really interesting job. So we're going to talk about what's an appropriate key and how to look for a key, what's a guide, and then online resources. So keys are a systematic method for going through the morphology of a plant or anything else. And basically you have two choices. You pick one choice, work your way through the key. I'll show you an example in a bit. So it's a great way for making, getting the choices, and you're always comparing two choices. Usually on plant structures, keys are something most people don't want to do, but you need to do it at least once because it's a great learning experience. When you use a key, whatever you're keying out, plants or animals or amphibians or whatever, butterflies, the key tells you what stuff to look for to separate groups out to get to where you want to be. So it's a great learning experience. Guides, on the other hand, can be almost anything else. So they can use photos or just pick, just plants in alphabetical order and you leaf through. So guides don't really have a system. They just give you a bunch of information, but keys have a system. So appropriate keys cover the location and the region you're after. So that's really important. Cover the plant groups that you need. Have range maps so you can see where the plant is. And, in North Carolina, we have a lot of native plants. But the native plants that are at the top of the Balsam Mountains out west aren't the same as the native plants that are here, which aren't the same as the native plants at the coast. So it turns out it's really important to have a range maps. I always look for things, especially mushrooms and plant keys and stuff that have line drawings. Color photographs are nice and are a recent thing, but often aren't the best resource because a line drawing, an artist can put things in a line drawing that don't all occur in a photograph really well. And you can see a lot of details. You can see things from different seasons all put into a line. So line drawings are good. Something that has all the different names that something might be called is often useful. And something that's been produced pretty recently. So keys rely on technical terms often, so make sure there's a glossary. Although we're going to show you some that don't have a glossary. Okay, so for example, this is a dichotomous key. Dichotomous means there's two choices. So if we wanted to identify leaf A, you go to number 1. 1A is needle leaves. It's not a needle leaf. Non-needle leaves. It says go to 3. So now you come down here. Simple leaves, which means a single leaf, or compound leaves. So it's a simple leaf, so it says go to 4. Smooth edge or jagged edge. Smooth edge, go to 5. The leaf edge is smooth or the leaf edge is lobed, so it's a magnolia. So that's kind of how a key works. You're always working your way through two choices until you get down. So North Carolina has, or the Southeast in general, has about 10,000 plants. In some cases, you might go through a lot of choices in order to get there. So there may be better ways of doing that. I recommend everybody go out and buy the pocket tree finders. There's a winter one. They're like $7. And the nice part is you can carry these, a whole bunch of them. So here's the tree finder. This is the winter twig finder. Here's winter weeds, animal tracks, berries, wildflowers, ferns. I mean, you can carry the whole set in your pocket. The thing that's nice about these is they're kind of like a graphic novel for plant identification, because they have stuff like if it's got any kind of disturbance. Does it grow around by cities? Did it come from across the sea? Does it like soil disturbance or fire, or is it found around agriculture? And then all these little things. It's kind of like, in some cases, the old magazine. It used to have these little cartoons in the margin. So they used to have little cartoons in the margin that says, this grows in the lowlands. This grows as an understory. This grows on the uplands. So all this little stuff is all included. And then instead of having to read through, you follow symbols. So you start here. If it looks like a pine tree, go to this page. If it looks like something else, go to page 14. If it looks like this, if it's got needles are long, 1/2 inch or to 18 inches, go there. So you follow these symbols through. So the nice part is you don't have to be a reader. You don't have to be, they're good for kids. You don't need to be, don't even have to be an adult. You can work your way through these keys. So I always recommend these for everybody because it looks like a kid's toy, but you'll learn a surprising amount of stuff from a little $7 key.
Where do you find these?
Amazon has them all. Yeah, I think we buy classroom sets, so we have some at Leon's Wildflower Preserve. We got the fern one, twig key, and leaf key. They work great. I can get 25 people to go through and identify stuff in a 2-hour workshop. Works pretty well, and they're surprisingly accurate. So the real book that you want nowadays, which is a relatively recent one, is The Native Trees of the Southeast, Kirkman, Brown, and Leopold. This is the Bible of trees nowadays. There were a couple other ones I used to recommend until this one came out, and I dropped the other ones, so I'm going for this. This one has both winter twig keys, as well as summer information, as well as a lot of other stuff. So here's the page from the bur oak, which is also called the mossy cup oak, and you can see how that looks more like it's in the chestnut family. And it has a nice range map, so you can see where it is. It's not in our area, so don't go looking for bur oak. I mean, they might be planted here in town, but they're not going to be native here. But they all have a description, then they have this nice distinguishing characteristics, a habitat and range, and some photographs of it. So there's lots of really good information in this book, so this is the book to have. I know at least one person in the audience has this, because they took the Master Naturalist class, and we gave them that book as the start of the Master Naturalist class, because we use that a lot. All of you, or many of you who are on the email list, should have gotten an email of a document that we produced for the Master Naturalist class, which is how we go about identifying trees in several field visits. And it includes the morphology first, and then it includes a little bit the summer leaves later, and then we put all that together into the natural communities. And then I've listed for each one of the natural communities that we're going to show you the trees that occur there. So that document was sent out. So if you didn't get that and you want to get that, if you're not on the email list, I think Bernie sent it out to everybody.
Somebody did.
So if you haven't gotten that document, talk to Bernie afterwards and he can send you that. It's a PDF. So here's the shagbark hickory. So then this is the same. So now we got a plant that's in our area. Here's what the bud looks like. There's the bark, there's the nuts, there's the leaves, description, fruit, distinguishing characteristics. So this book is really great, got a lot of good stuff in it. I also like Botany in a Day. If you're interested in, especially herbalism, when I teach classes to herbalists, botany for herbalists, like if you know the mint family, you know the chemistry of the mint family, and all the mint families have similar chemistry, so you can use them in your herbal. So this is a book written for herbalists, but it has a lot of really good information. So here's the beech family. So the beech family includes, what do we got? The dwarf chinkapin, we've got the beech. So it tells you what, so it's got the chestnuts, it's got the chinkapins, it's got the beech tree, tanbark oak, and the rest of the oaks. So it puts things together that are all in the same family, and they all have similar characteristics. So here's the elm family, and they say right here, it says, look for trees and shrubs that have asymmetrical leaf bases. So notice how the leaf base on one side is acute and one side is obtuse. So everything in this family is like that. The leaves are asymmetrical. So that's part of the elm family. So this is a really good book that has all kinds of plants by family, and once you get a feeling for the family characteristics, that's one way to group things together. So then you know, if you can figure out what something's in a family, then it makes your whole keying a lot easier because you start with the family and you only go there. You don't have to go through the whole 10,000 plants. So this is the FloraQuest app. So this uses a different system, which you'll love once you try it. It's called, so you're gonna get FloraQuest Carolinas and Georgia, because there's so many plants, the Southeast, this goes from like Delaware down to Florida, all the way to East Texas. That's all the stuff that's in the flora of the Southeast. They broke it up into 5 different apps. So the Carolinas and Georgia covers the coastal plain, the Piedmont, and the mountains of these 3 states. They have, the nice part is they have what's called a graphic key. So they start out, they would have, it would say like there's 5,000 plants. But then you open the graphic key and you say, well, looks like a lily, so I'll highlight that. It doesn't have a space, it doesn't have a cover, so hit no. And as you hit each one of these selections, this number goes down until you get to some number that you can now actually go and look at. And the nice part about you can either go through the key and identify things. You can also just punch in the name. Like if you get, my favorite way to use this is to recommend iNaturalist, which is the only ID app for plants and animals that I recommend. For several reasons. It's curated, California Academy of Science and National Geographic. If you hit share at the end of iNaturalist, it goes out to the world of scientists, and our Natural Heritage Program and our Nature Conservancy and others review that so people can basically it's doing citizen science, so people can get information. So you use something like this, whatever app you're using, you want to use FloraQuest to confirm that that app is correct. Because once you get to the so you click on the page, you get to this identification page, now you've got photos, you've got description information, and you've got range maps. And then depending on where you click, like if you clicked on range maps, you could still go through these up and down arrow keys and see what things are in your area where you're standing. The other nice thing about this app is instead of doing all the plants of Georgia, North and South Carolina, you could put in the zip code that you're working in or the town, and it gets rid of everything that's not in your area. So if we know where we put in Forsyth County, it gets rid of the coastal plain stuff and the mountain stuff. So it makes it a whole lot easier to identify things. So you want to get FloraQuest. It's the best $20 you'll ever spend. So, like I mentioned, so use iNaturalist or Seek. Seek is the kid version of iNaturalist that doesn't share data. iNaturalist is the professional version that allows you to share data with other peers. And the nice part is you upload something, you share it, and then there's some official expert somewhere who will make recommendations on your identification. So get some identification recommendations, then take it to FloraQuest and use FloraQuest to confirm. The nice part is once you get to FloraQuest, if you use an app, most of the times there's not a lot of data there. But FloraQuest has all kinds of data available to you to make sure you confirm your observation. So this is the oaks and hickories of Ridges Mountain and other things. So we've got sweet gum, we've got white oak, we've got mock-nut hickory, we've got a red oak, we've got a chestnut oak. So this is one of my watercolors I just threw in there. So we're going to talk about natural communities. So you can use the tools I've just talked to you about and these books in order to get an identification. Now, why do you want to know about natural communities? So imagine, this is a talk for foragers. So you want to buy a hamburger, you go into the grocery store. Where do you go to find hamburger? You go to the produce department? No. You go to the cereal aisle? No. You go to the back where the meat counter is, right? It's the same thing with natural communities. So you got to know what you're looking for and where it occurs. And that's what the natural communities will tell you. So natural communities are an assemblage of reoccurring assemblage of plants and animals and bacteria that grow together in the environment. And there's an actual definition for that. They're also ranked depending on how rare they are state and globally. So natural communities They're the climax mature plant communities, so when we do natural heritage inventories or we do county inventories, I look for places all around the county that we had mature forests or rocks or wetlands or whatever, and that's the kind of natural community that I'm looking for. So it's stable and easy to identify. Change occurs in response to slope. So, you know, the south side of a hillside is hot and dry. The north side of the hillside is cool and moist. East side gets morning sun, doesn't get the hot summers. So there's different plants. So in the Piedmont, every little hill, rolling hill, has different stuff happening on the top and the sides and the bottom, depending on what direction it points, north, south, east, or west. Whether you're on the top dry, shallow soils, or you're at the bottom in the floodplain with deep, moist soils. So all of that is important. And recognizing the natural community tells a lot about the site, and in your case, that what it tells you is what kind of fungi might be there. So you can get this document from the Natural Heritage Program. That's the actual definition of the classification of North Carolina's natural communities. I think there's now a fourth approximation, but you probably would rather buy this book, which is the publicly, the other one is kind of a sciencey document. It's all typed pages, no diagrams, no illustrations. This one has really nice stuff. This is another one of the southern gateways. So it has all of the natural communities in the southern Appalachians, mountains, and Piedmont, and they've lumped them into useful categories, and they describe the plants in there, they describe the geology, they describe the wildflowers, all of that's in there. So you can put this on your Christmas list or something. You really want to do that. So once you know what natural communities are, we can then start thinking about where do we go in the environment to forage for things that occur on the landscape. And it's not like wandering around the grocery store any old where. You're going to find things where they would be growing with the rest of their natural community. So North Carolina has about 115 natural communities. We've got about 5,600 native plants, 1,500 animals. Of our 5,600 native plants, 700 plus now are listed as somehow rare. Almost 300 animals are listed. Forsyth County has 10 natural communities. Guilford County has 18. Stokes has 22, primarily because Stokes is less urban developed and also has a lot more topography, which gives you a lot more slopes and elevations and stuff. And of the 22, probably 8 of them are in Hanging Rock State Park, just because that's kind of the place that you find in parks. So this is the oaks of Stokes County. So Falcate oak, scarlet oak, white oak, chestnut oak. So give you some idea. So the common natural communities of the Piedmont include, from the top of the hill down, dry oak hickory forest, good for some kinds of fungi, not for others. Dry mesic, so mesic means moist, so now you're heading down the hillside and pick up a little moisture, so now all of a sudden, so dry oak hickory forest on the top of the hill, you wouldn't find beech trees, you wouldn't find red maple, but you start to pick them up when you get a little bit more moist. Mesic mixed hardwood forest, so now we're at the bottom of the slope, bottom of the hill, a lot of moisture, so now beech trees, ironwoods, those kind of things. Piedmont alluvial forest. Alluvial means along a creek, so flatlands along a creek. So now we start to talk about box elders and other things, lots of wildflowers usually in a Piedmont alluvial forest. So that's where we're going to find dogtooth violets this time of year. That's where you would find mixed mesic hardwood forest. That's going to be bloodroot this time of year. So depending on what you're looking for. Piedmont levee forest, that's that little sandy bank that occurs naturally along stream edges. You know, as the water comes up full of flood water, full of sediment, as soon as it starts to spread out in the valley, it drops the sand. So there's always 2 levees on either side of a big body of water. That's the sandy levee. Well, the sandy levee is where sycamore trees, river birches, black walnuts, those are the kind of things that are all on levee forest. And all of these are in that document with the trees broken out in them that got emailed out yesterday or today. Piedmont seep or spring. So even those little wet spots where water seeps out of the ground in the middle of a forest, they can have a completely different mixture of species going there, so they're considered their own natural community type. So the uncommon ones that are in the Piedmont, Carolina hemlock bluff, this is the top of Pilot Mountain, this is the top of Hanging Rock. The Carolina hemlock is different than the eastern hemlock, which grows along the creeks in Hanging Rock, but the Carolina hemlock is only at the top of the hill. Pine oak heath, that's Table Mountain pine, and things in the heath is blueberry family. That's the top of the hill. Spray cliff, that's the stuff that grows on the side of waterfalls. You know, you need a waterfall or else this one's not occurring anywhere. And you can find small little spray cliffs, even in little creeks that have a 3-foot or so waterfall in the woods around here. If you look around, there's things growing there like liverworts and hornworts and other things that like moisture. Basic forest types, this means high pH, basic. So they're gonna be like, usually you start to pick up basic when you see a lot of redbud trees in the woods, you see a lot of cedars, Virginia cedars in the woods. That means there's a higher soil pH. The high soil pH places weather into richer soils. So that's mostly where colonial settlements happened in the southeast, because people used the soil for their farming and also for their medicine cabinet. So we know people came to historic Bethabara because of what they saw growing there. So unfortunately, a lot of our basic mesic soils are under urban and suburban development, because they were the focal points all around Old Salem, got those kind of places. Piedmont monadnock forest, that's the top of a rocky mountain. Piedmont swamp forest, most of the swamp forests in the Piedmont had been ditched and drained and turned into agriculture. So there's only very few decent Piedmont swamp forests left. And granitic flat rock. We have one that I know of here in Forsyth County, and it's off the trail in the backside of Salem Lake Park. And it's got it doesn't have, you're not gonna find mushrooms growing there, but you're gonna find lots of other cool little things that like growing on granite, little tiny plants on granite. So, natural communities help you read the landscape. The more you can read the landscape, the more you know about what's there. So that gives you an understanding of the landscape. We like that. You mostly are reflecting on past firestorm logging, grazing, farming. You realize in this part of North Carolina, all our forests have been logged at least 4 times, maybe 5. So 5 times we've been logged. So the ecologists that I know say 75% of what was there before logging comes back after each logging. So after you've been logged 3 or 4 or 5 times, now you're looking at forests that probably only have about 25% of the biodiversity that they would have had pre-logging events. It's a way to predict future land cover. If you're buying a piece of property and you know where it is on the landscape and you know a little bit about the soils, you can predict what kind of forests are going to grow there. If you're a tree farmer, that's important. If you're using the woods for some other method, hunting, fishing, those kind of things, important. Locating associated plants and fungi. That's why we're talking about it here, because if you know about natural communities, you know what's going to be part of that natural community. And it's good for managing for profit or ecology, and good for me because I use it. Once you know what's common and what common things look like, then the rare stuff sticks out. So you want to be able to find, you want to appreciate the uncommon and the threatened. And how you find that is by realizing what the common is. More oaks and hickories and things. So, trees never grow alone. This is where we start to talk about trees and fungi. So trees, like most other plants, sense, communicate, and connect to their neighbors. They do that mostly through their long life and their connections that they make with each other through hyphae under the soil. And forests are much more than the parts that we see. So it turns out there's a lot of stuff going on underground that we have only recently started to appreciate. So resource use. One mature tree growing in full sun can capture 88 million calories of sunlight. That's enough to, if you could find some way to harness that, you could power 20 houses with that every day. Make 2 tons of sugar. 1 square meter of leaf, that's a yard, can make 1 gram of sugar per hour. That's a lot of energy being harvested. That's the biggest tulip tree in Stokes County that I'm aware of. And the reason it was unlogged all these years is it's taller than the rest of the forest, and it marks a ford across the Dan River. And you can see it for miles and miles away. So if you're trundling along in your cart or your horse, you want to cross the Dan River, you look for this big tree and that gets you there.
Where's the location of it?
It's off of Dan George Road and a little bit east of Danbury, or a little bit west of Danbury. No, there's no road to get to it. So this sugar can be converted to wood, which allows trees to be the biggest things on Earth. 1,000 acres of Douglas fir can make 5 million board feet, enough to build 5,000 houses in 80 years. Trees share nutrients with each other. So it turns out there's a book called by Susan Simard called Search for the Mother Tree, and it talks about foresters now thinking that they need to leave more trees instead of clear cutting, because when you clear cut, you remove all of the hyphae that would be there, and when you plant something else, they go into this area where they don't have the support system. If you leave just a few trees to keep the hyphae alive, then anything you plant there also benefits. Fungi, bacteria, insects, and animals all share the photosynthate made by leaves. So who knows what this one is? It's a pawpaw. Before I put the butterfly in this painting, people thought I had painted an olive tree. But I've had to put in a butterfly, and then people got an idea that those fruits were larger, so pawpaws. So the ecosystem of roots are dynamic. They grow, they die, they move back in and out, they probe, they retreat. I mean, there's a lot of active stuff going on underground. 40% of the photosynthate in that tree, those sugars, leaks out of the roots. And that's what feeds a dense complex of bacteria and fungi that surround the roots. So 1 gram of rhizosphere, that's the stuff right around the roots, can contain 100 million microbes and miles, so a gram is would be the amount on the end of my thumb, miles of hyphae. So there's a lot going on under there, and we benefit from it. So the rhizosphere is usually connected to the forest community. It connects trees of different species to each other and makes the roots a lot more efficient. It also, in some cases, the rhizosphere acts as like a sock around the tree root, protecting it from chemical and pathogens. And the rhizosphere removes photosynthate from healthy trees in the sun and can ship it to less healthy or shaded trees, and helps some trees recover from root damage. American holly. So one of the experiments that I was involved in graduate school is to look at truffles. Now truffles are an interesting fungi because they grow, their fruiting structure grows underground. It's a mycorrhizal tree associate, but it's an underground fungus. So how does it spread its spores? Well, it turns out longleaf pine requires some mycorrhizal partner to grow in those sandy soils. So how do those trees get inoculated? Well, it turns out it's by squirrels. If you look at all the vegetation that's out in the environment, all the green stuff you see when you go look anywhere, that's sodium deficient. That's why animals like salt licks, is because all of the green stuff you see is sodium deficient. Fungi are sodium rich. So it turns out that's why a lot of animals eat fungi. So squirrels go and dig up these truffles, and then they spread the spores in their droppings, and that's how they spread the inoculant for the trees. So we published an article that showed a three-way evolution. So the trees need the mycorrhizae to grow, the squirrels need the sodium to grow, and the fungi need the squirrels to move their spores. So you get this really interesting three-way ecology in order to do that. So there are a lot of fungi. Most of the fungi that grow in the forest on the ground are mycorrhizal fungi. And the biggest family of mycorrhizal are all of the russulas. And the russulas are a really problematic group taxonomically. We probably are going to break those up into into many species more than we know now. Same thing with the chanterelles. There's lots of people, the Besets are some of them, that say what we think are probably 6 to 10 kinds of chanterelles that we have now are probably going to be 20 at some point. When you wind up with a graduate student working on all that kind of stuff. So, but russulas, we know, are one of the primary mycorrhizal fungi that happens in the woods, in pines, actually, in this case. So, just for your information, if you're interested in what the Piedmont Land Conservancy does, we have 4 themes. So natural heritage is kind of like rare stuff, nice forests, wetlands, rare species, plants and animals. We do watershed protection, stuff on the Dan River. When there's a coal ash spill, they call me and ask what are the things that we could do for mitigation of coal ash, and we generated a little list, and that was the kind of stuff that Duke Power used for mitigation of the coal ash spill. We do a lot of farmland protection. Farmland is great. At some point, the model of shipping stuff from California is either going to fall apart because of lack of water or transportation costs, and it'd be nice if we still have farmland around here. So we've probably got, of our 280, almost 300 projects now, probably 125 of them are farms, and if I had more money than the state gives us every year, we have a list of farmers waiting to do conservation easements. It's almost the only way the young farmer can get into farming nowadays is to buy a farm that has the development rights removed so the property value is less. If you don't inherit it from your grandparents or your parents or whatever, the only way a new person get into farming is to get a farm that has an easement on it. Or urban green space now. So urban green space includes things like that Crosnor Trail that we got done building. You've heard about the new Beshavia Creek Nature Preserve, which is going to be off of Kilmurray and Skylark and Kilmurray. So we're in the process of doing lots of nature preserves in all of our 13 counties. So currently 31,000 acres of stuff. So this is what the Land Conservancy is all about, what we call the other infrastructure, natural, scenic, species, forests, climate, blah, blah, blah. This is a friend of mine who has a conservation easement up in Low Gap. They've got some great old forests up in Low Gap. Low Gap is this is on Saddle Mountain, which used to be chestnuts before the chestnut blight. Chestnut blight only happened 80 years ago, roughly, so we have a complete changeover of the natural communities along the Blue Ridge because the chestnuts were the dominant and now they're gone. So now it's black oaks and other things. And I always talk about what the Land Conservancy does is save enough of the environment so that we have enough functional pieces so whatever happens with climate change, land use, diseases, invasive species, Mother Nature still has enough parts and pieces to do her thing. So you can contact me at that phone number or Ken Bridle at Piedmont Land. So I'm conservation advisor at the Land Conservancy, also instructor of natural naturalist and president of the Native Plant Society. I'd be willing to take questions. So we're just coming up on 7:30. Everybody's stunned into silence. That's a good thing. Yes?
The Master Naturalist?
Yes? We started a Piedmont Master Naturalist program. North Carolina is one of 6 states that don't have a Master Naturalist program. It's sort of like a Master Gardener program in that there's classroom, there's field experiences, and then there's also a required volunteer hours or impact project. So last year was our first Master Naturalist program. This year we have another one that involves 8 full field days out in Saturday. So we'll be going, in 2 weeks, we go to Emily Allen's Wildflower Garden to do spring wildflowers. And then we'll go down to Monarchus Creek and do dip netting for aquatic species and benthic macroinvertebrates and stuff. The month after that, we'll go to Pilot Mountain, soaring birds and rare plants around the mountain and geology on the top, and then down in the bottom do some wetlands and dip netting. So my job is to find interesting places within an hour and a half of the triad that goes have interesting geology, geography, rare plants, animals, wetlands, interesting natural communities, parking and bathrooms, because I'm taking 30 people out, so I gotta have parking and bathrooms. So we've got one Master Naturalist graduate here, and we've got one in the back row that's in our current class. So you can find Northwest Piedmont Master Naturalist on you can Google that, and we have a web page, and Rebecca Krapps from Forsyth Cooperative Extension is kind of our administrator of the volunteer hours. I do the sciencey stuff. I don't do volunteer hours. I don't care about your volunteer hours. I don't care about your impact.
Is it mandatory the same as Master Gardeners?
What's that?
The volunteer hours for the Master?
I think we're doing 20 hours a week, or 20 hours for the first year, or an impact project. And then once you're a graduate of the Master Naturalist, we're forming a Master Naturalist Association, and then we'll bring people for advanced training. So last week, I was at the state wildlife meeting, and my friend Lanny Lampel from Mecklenburg County is a great lepidopterist, butterfly. Mecklenburg County has a natural areas program as part of their Parks and Rec. It just does natural areas. Can you imagine Parks and Rec people that don't sit on lawnmowers? That's those guys in Mecklenburg County. So they have things like Underbarium for Mecklenburg County. They've identified 992 moth species. So Lenny is gonna come up here sometime probably in June or early July and do a moth night for our Master Naturalist graduates. Some of them, David just went on a birding trip to the coast with the Master Naturalist. My co-instructor is Chris Marsh, who's a retired college professor and a vertebrate biologist and a birder. So I do the ecology and botany part, and he does the vertebrate stuff. So,
How long is the course?
This current course is one full Saturday a month, January, February, March, and then in April we do 2, and in May we do 2 Saturdays, and we finish up in June. And then the rest of the year is time for you to do your volunteer hours or your impact project. If you want to stay part of the Master Naturalist Association, there's continuing volunteer hours. So Cooperative Extension can tell you they live and die by volunteer hours. So they like volunteer hours. So this project fits well with them, and we don't want, so the web page and the finances is all handled through the Piedmont Land Conservancy, but the Cooperative Extension people they like to manage the hours, and they're good at it. So that's what's happening. So that's that.
There's more information on the website about this?
There is information on the website. Usually, the last 2 years, the applications for the new class, which starts in January of 2026, will come out in October. So generally we get our applications. The first year was kind of nice. We had 90 people apply, and we didn't know how big we wanted the class, so I made 24. I picked 12 people that were young people that had some sort of environmental nexus. So we had state park new rangers, we had interpretation people from gardens, we had museum people, and then we got older, wiser people, like David, that know how to volunteer and have documented volunteering and being community members, because we want people not to be doing this just for their own use. We want people to go out and do things as Master Naturalists. Lead hikes, volunteer in your community, remove invasive plants, whatever. And it turns out this time I've got Florida Master Naturalist certified trainer, a Virginia Master Naturalist, and a Texas Master Naturalist that are already certified in those other states, but they're now here, Wake Forest staff or something, so they're being we're teaching them the local flora and fauna that way. So we've already done, last year, our first outing, we went to Bethania, we were out in Monarchus Creek, and we identified as a class a new salamander that was a new Forsyth County record.
Cool.
So, that kind of stuff. So, there's a lot of citizen science people can be doing. I like something called Nature's Notebook. You can Google Nature's Notebook, and they have projects that you can get involved with, and I'm involved with one called Quercus Quest, which is looking at chestnut oaks and white oaks and bur oaks, but not in our area, but those two, chestnut oaks and white oaks in the southeast, sometimes don't grow in the same area. Further south they don't. In our area, they happen to grow side by side in some cases, and if they flower together, they'll hybridize. And they're wanting data on that. So I go out and stand in my woods and I watch for when the buds break, when the flowers happen, and you fill in a little thing on and there's another one like there's hummingbirds. So the Nature's Notebook is all about phenology, which is the timing of things. So when did the hummingbirds get here? Turns out the hummingbirds are coming about 2 weeks earlier than they were 100 years ago. Redbud trees are blooming earlier. That kind of stuff. So there's redbud things, there's butterfly things, there's all sorts of bird things. So Nature's Notebook is a great way to do citizen science. Yes?
So back to the plant communities, which plant communities are your favorite for your favorite edible mushroom?
In the spring, mesic, moist forests that have tulip trees, commonly miscalled tulip poplars, because they're not in the poplar family. That's your take home, you're all gonna know that now. So if you look for tulip trees on a north or east facing slope that also has red maples and maybe some black oaks, that's gonna be morel habitat. Later in the summertime, if you're in a dry oak hickory forest that has a dry valley, that's chanterelle territory in the summertime. Oddly, if you have a turned up root almost anywhere in the woods, you'll get the little cinnabar chanterelles growing off the root zone of the upturned tree. That's another interesting thing, which I didn't mention here, but I told the folks at the Wildlife Committee, the father of American mycology worked in Winston-Salem from 1810 to 1821 as an administrator of the Moravian Church. So that's David von Schweinitz. So if you pick up Alan Bassett's book, the Mushrooms of the Carolinas or the Mushrooms of the Southeast, either of those two books, and you look for that little hyphenated name after the scientific name of all the mushrooms, you'll find like 25 or 30 mushrooms identified by David von Schweinitz. He was actually interested in the fungi that affect Moravian crops. So he's the guy who identified that orange rust that grows on blackberries, that black soot on black knot on cherry trees, a fungal disease of grapes. So he has that kind of stuff. But he also identified that little chanterelle, that little tiny red chanterelle is a David von Schweinitz description. So the Moravian Old Salem is actually modifying the upstairs of the Vogel doctor's house to be a David von Schweinitz exhibit, and some of it is about his mycology. By the time he was left here in 1821, he had collected 1,200 samples of mushrooms and sent them to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, which is the Smithsonian of the colonial period. And a lot of his documents and his original field notes are still in the Moravian archives in Old Salem, and they're in German. And you can translate, you can tell he walked up Peters Creek, and he went up to Hanging Rock, and he took a 2-day trip and took a horse ride up to Roanoke and stuff like that. And you can find a historical marker to him at the road that leads up to Hanging Rock, father of American mycology. When Flora Ann Bynum was cleaning out a house in what is now Old Salem in 1970, she found in the attic watercolor tinted sketches of mushrooms that were original David von Schweinitz watercolors were in this attic. They were cleaning out to turn it into one of those historic houses. It was 160 years old and still looked good. Those are now in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. So we really have a deep and interesting mycological history here in Winston-Salem that I don't think many people are aware of. I collected a lot of those documents. I've got stuff on my computer of David von Schweinitz's original drawings, and some of the records. Some of his stuff has been translated into English in 1930 periodicals. Those are at the Moravian Archives. You can go get 1935 version of Bartramania, and they have an article where somebody translated his German notes, and you can tell where he went around in the county. And when I was doing the county inventories back in the 1990s, I used some of that to still find interesting areas that are still in the undeveloped parts of the 100,000 acres that was the Moravian Wachovia tract. Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
All right. This has been eating me up since right after morel season.
Oh, this is a
last year.
good one, I can tell.
So I read in a book, May-ish or so last year, that morels prefer high pH soil. And just anecdotally, like, I think that's one reason we don't find a lot of those in the Piedmont, because most
Exactly.
of it's clay. So, my very small number of spots tend to be somewhat mountainous, and I remember, a lot of them have ferns around it, which I guess is another indicator of a high.
Well, high biodiversity in general, so high pH, as Celine would tell you, from horticulture point of view, when you raise the pH above a certain level, it frees up a lot of minerals that would be locked up to the iron and aluminum molecules that make our soils red. So when you raise the pH, you make a lot more nutrition available that otherwise would be locked up, which is the case in basic mesic forests. So you're going to have a lot more species in those basic conditions. I am not a big fan of morels because they're in a group of fungi that's also used for cleaning up hazardous waste things. And the reason they're used in that way is because they're accumulators. So there's a place, that woman who was hugging that tree, they have morels that grow up out of the gravel on their property on Saddle Mountain, but I wouldn't eat them because of the stuff that drips off of cars is going to be accumulated into those. So morels can be iffy if you're in an urban area, or you're in an area where it's now forested, but it used to be a tobacco field, and the tobacco people used to use arsenic and mercury compounds for their insecticide. That kind of stuff can be accumulated. So morels can be a little iffy for eating a lot of, it's just like any, like fish advisories in Ballew's Lake. You can eat once a month something fish, but don't eat fish out of Ballew's Lake every day, or you're going to have a selenium problem. And selenium in little bits is okay, selenium in a lot is bad. Same thing with morels and some other fungi. Some other fungi that are not edible types are really accumulators. So you want to watch that. But if you find some place that has lots of red buds, or lots of Virginia cedars growing in a wooded area, and has a noticeable enrichment of ground biodiversity of ferns and wildflowers and other things, that's going to be a good morel habitat.
Another thing that I have found, like in Somerville where I live, I've got 2 honey holes there. The Iliacnus, they grow, and it's mostly the smaller morels.
Well, Iliacnus is a invasive non-native autumn olive or Russian olive.
Right.
It's a nitrogen fixing plant, so it does provide some nutrition to the soil, which is one of the reasons why it's invasive. But I wouldn't look for that as an indicator of something in nature, because it's an invasive species mostly of disturbed urban and suburban habitats, so.
Well,
Could
this
be.
is not, I mean, this is deep in the woods.
Yeah, I know, yeah,
But it's the little tiny ones that come, you know, what I guess they call them the tulip morels. But they don't get, you know, much larger than your thumb.
but there are, the little white ones is the ones that we have commonly on our property in a area with tulip trees and also running cedar on the ground on a moist floodplain.
Yeah, no cedar.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what about apples?
What about apples?
The relationship with the apple trees and morel, I've read about this.
I don't have any experience with apple trees and morels. I do have experience where I've planted chestnut trees on my property and I get fungi, suillus and some boletes that grow under those trees that don't grow anywhere else in my 28 acres. So I think the mycorrhizae must be hanging around from 80 years waiting for something to happen. So my chestnut trees, but I don't know about apples. Apples, again, aren't a native part of our landscape. All the apple trees that we have, apples are native to the northern part of Iran and the Ural Mountains, same place where tulips come from. So it turns out they would be a good indicator of morel. I mean, they might be a good indicator of where morels grow in the Ural Mountains and in northern Iran, but around here, apple trees are a horticultural crop. And then again, if you're in an old apple orchard that has been regularly sprayed with copper and sulfur and fungicides and whatever, then I wouldn't necessarily be eating stuff that I find under apple trees either. But it's not it's like the Elaeagnus, it's an introduced species that it probably is not something gonna be closely related with our native flora of fungi.
So we need to look for tulip trees.
Tulip trees would be your best bet, and moist areas that don't get a lot of sun along creeks is where I find them mostly. Anything else? All right,
Door
I got
prizes.
at least one person yawning, so that's a
We
bad
got door
sign.
prizes though.